The sun blazed mercilessly over the northern savanna of Burkina Faso, casting long shadows across the red dirt roads that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Ibrahim Traoré sat in the back of the armored vehicle, his military fatigues crisp despite the oppressive heat, his eyes scanning the landscape with the practiced vigilance of a soldier who had spent years fighting on these very front lines. The motorcade, consisting of 6 vehicles carrying presidential guards, intelligence officers, and essential staff, moved steadily along the newly paved Route Nationale 3, heading toward the town of Djibo, a strategic location that had become a symbol of resistance against the jihadist insurgency that plagued the nation. At 37 years old, Traoré had become the world's youngest head of state, thrust into power not through ambition, but through necessity. The young captain had led a coup against Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba just over 2 years ago, frustrated by the inability of the previous administration to stem the tide of violence that had claimed thousands of Burkinabe lives and displaced nearly 2 million people. Now, as president and supreme commander of the armed forces, he carried the weight of a nation on his shoulders, a nation that looked to him as their last hope against the forces of chaos. "Mr. President, we're approximately 40 kilometers from Djibo," announced Major Ouedraogo from the front passenger seat, his hand resting near his sidearm, a habit ingrained from months of combat operations. The major had been with Traoré since his days as an artillery commander in Kaya, a trusted officer who understood that in Burkina Faso, danger lurked around every corner, behind every acacia tree, beyond every rocky outcropping. Traoré nodded, his expression thoughtful. This trip was more than ceremonial. In recent months, his government had embarked on an ambitious infrastructure program, purchasing road construction equipment from Ghana and training thousands of young Burkinabe to build their own future, literally. The plan was to construct 5,000 kilometers of paved roads, surpassing the mere 3,642 kilometers built since independence in 1960. It was a bold statement of self-reliance, a rejection of the foreign dependency that had kept Burkina Faso and much of Africa in perpetual development limbo. "The people need to see that we're building, not just fighting," Traoré said, almost to himself. His voice carried that distinctive quiet intensity that had made him so effective as a military commander. Unlike many leaders who shouted to be heard, Traoré's power came from his measured words and unwavering conviction. They need to see roads, schools, hospitals. They need to see that sovereignty means more than just removing foreign troops. It means controlling our own destiny. The landscape outside shifted as they traveled deeper into the Sahel region. The lush green of the southern provinces gave way to sparser vegetation, thorny bushes, and the occasional baobab tree standing sentinel over the plains. This was Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin territory, or at least it had been. The Al-Qaeda-affiliated group, known as JNIME, had controlled vast swaths of northern Burkina Faso, imposing their harsh interpretation of Islamic law, burning schools, killing teachers, and terrorizing anyone who cooperated with the government. But Traoré's forces, alongside the volunteers for the defense of the homeland, civilian militias trained to support the army, had been pushing back, reclaiming territory village by village, road by road. Traoré's satellite phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A message from his Minister of Defense regarding a recent skirmish near the Malian border. They had neutralized a group of militants attempting to smuggle weapons into the country. Good news, but there was always more work to be done. The insurgency was like a hydra. Cut off one head, and 2 more seemed to appear. The only sustainable solution was to address the root causes: poverty, lack of education, and the sense of abandonment that made young men vulnerable to extremist recruitment. "Mr. President Bitsika, we're approaching the Nakambe River crossing," announced the driver, Captain Sawadogo, a veteran of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali, before returning home to fight for his own country. "The new bridge should be just ahead." The Nakambe River, though not particularly wide, served as a crucial geographic marker in the region. The old bridge, a colonial-era structure that had stood for decades, had been destroyed 2 years ago during a militant attack designed to cut off supply routes to the northern garrisons. Rebuilding it had been a priority, both strategically and symbolically. A new bridge meant connectivity, commerce, and the government's presence in areas that had felt forgotten. As the motorcade rounded a bend in the road, the bridge came into view, or rather what should have been a bridge. Instead, Traoré saw an incomplete structure, its concrete pillars rising from the riverbed, but the actual span nowhere near finished. Construction equipment sat idle on the far bank, and several workers in orange vests stood near the approach, waving their arms frantically. "Stop the convoy!" Traoré ordered immediately. The motorcade came to a halt about 50 meters from the incomplete bridge. Major Ouedraogo was already on his radio, demanding an explanation from advanced security that should have verified the route hours earlier. "Sir, advance team reports the bridge was supposed to be completed last week, according to the Ministry of Infrastructure's timeline," the major said, his voice tight with frustration. "There must have been a delay." Traoré stepped out of the vehicle, ignoring the immediate protest from his security detail. The heat hit him like a physical force, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the incomplete bridge, his tactical mind already calculating alternatives. The nearest crossing point was at least 60 kilometers to the east, adding several hours to their journey, and taking them through an area where JNIM had conducted 3 ambushes in the past month alone. One of the construction workers, a middle-aged man with dust caking his clothes, approached cautiously. "Mr. President," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and embarrassment, "we had a delay with the materials." "The cement supplier, how long until it's possible?" Traoré interrupted, not unkindly but with the directness of a military commander who needed information, not excuses. "At least 3 days, sir, maybe 4 if we encounter any." "We don't have 3 days," Traoré said. He turned to Major Ouedraogo. "What about the eastern crossing?" The major's expression darkened. "The Bulsa route." "Sir, intelligence reports militant activity in that sector. Just yesterday, a supply convoy was fired upon near Corsimoro. We'd be vulnerable." Traoré stood silently for a moment, weighing his options. Behind him, his security team had formed a defensive perimeter, their weapons at the ready. The isolated location, the failed bridge, the need to detour through dangerous territory. Individually, these were manageable problems. Together, they formed a pattern that every combat veteran learned to recognize, the setup for an ambush. But was it planned, or simply the confluence of poor planning and bad luck that plagued infrastructure projects across Africa? "Mr. President, we should turn back," Major Ouedraogo urged. "We can reschedule the Djibo inspection once we've verified—" "No," Traoré said firmly. "Turning back sends the wrong message. The people of Djibo are expecting us. They need to see that their president doesn't hide behind walls in Ouagadougou. They need to know that we're in this fight together." He paused, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But we're not going to rush into a potential trap either. Major, get me a detailed intelligence briefing on all alternative routes. I want satellite imagery if available, recent patrol reports, everything. And find out exactly why this bridge wasn't completed on schedule and who authorized updating our route without this critical information." As his team scrambled to gather information, Traoré walked closer to the incomplete bridge, his boots crunching on the gravel. The Nakambe River flowed sluggishly below, its waters low from the dry season, but still too deep and too wide to ford with vehicles. The failed infrastructure project had become more than an inconvenience. It had become a strategic vulnerability that could cost lives. In Burkina Faso, such vulnerabilities were exactly what the enemy waited to exploit. Chapter 2. While Major Ouedraogo coordinated with intelligence services back in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood near the incomplete bridge, his mind working through the tactical implications of their situation. The afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, painting the savannah in shades of amber and gold. In a few hours, darkness would fall, and with it, the considerable advantages that night operations gave to the militants who knew this terrain intimately. Captain Ouedraogo approached with a military-grade tablet, displaying topographical maps of the region. "Sir, we've identified 3 possible alternative routes," he said, placing the tablet on the hood of the presidential vehicle. "The first is the eastern route through Bulsa, as discussed. It adds approximately 75 kilometers and 3 hours to our journey. The second option takes us south to Kupela, then north again, much longer but through more secure territory. The third option—" He hesitated. "Go on," Traoré prompted. There's an old mining road that parallels the river about 15 kilometers west of here. It was used by a Canadian gold exploration company 5 years ago before the security situation deteriorated. It's rough, probably hasn't been maintained, but it could cut through to the northwestern approach to Djibo. We'd save time, but Sawadogo trailed off. But we'd be completely isolated with no military presence or civilian populations to fall back on, Traoré finished. And if militants know about this road, and they almost certainly do, it would be an ideal ambush site. Major Ouedraogo joined them, his phone pressed to his ear. After a moment, he lowered it, his expression grim. "Sir, I've been speaking with Colonel Traoré at the National Intelligence Agency. This situation is concerning." Traoré's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "The bridge delay was reported to the Ministry of Infrastructure 2 weeks ago, but somehow that information never made it to the Presidential Security Service. Colonel Traoré is investigating how our route briefing this morning indicated the bridge was complete, when clearly it's not." Ouedraogo's jaw tightened. "There's more, sir. Our signals intelligence has picked up unusual radio chatter in the Bulsa sector over the past 6 hours, code words that match patterns we've seen preceding coordinated attacks. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and Traoré didn't like what he was seeing. They knew we'd have to detour," he said quietly. "The question is whether this bridge delay was coincidental or manufactured to force us onto that eastern route where they're waiting." "Sir, if I may," interjected Lieutenant Zungrana, the youngest member of the security detail, but a veteran of the Special Counter-Terrorism Unit that Traoré himself had once commanded. "During my time in the Cobra unit, we saw militants coordinate with sympathizers in construction projects to create exactly these kinds of strategic vulnerabilities. A delayed shipment here, a work stoppage there, nothing that looks overtly suspicious, but creates opportunities for attack." Traoré nodded slowly. Cobra unit, the anti-jihadist force he had led from northern Burkina Faso, had become legendary for its effectiveness, but also for its understanding of how the enemy thought and operated. JNAM and their Islamic State rivals weren't mindless fanatics. They were sophisticated military organizations that employed everything from guerrilla tactics to intelligence operations. "Mr. President, I strongly recommend we return to Ouagadougou immediately," Major Ouedraogo said, his tone respectful but firm. "We can address the security breach, investigate the bridge situation, and plan a properly secured visit to Djibo once we've made it clear that the President can be forced to change his plans by an incomplete bridge and some radio chatter," Traoré interrupted. He wasn't angry, just stating a tactical reality. "Major, I understand your concerns. Truly, I do. But consider what message we send if I turn back now. Every militant commander between here and Mali will know that all they need to do is create uncertainty, and the Burkinabe government will retreat. We cannot govern through fear of shadows. With respect, sir, these aren't shadows. These are credible threats backed by intelligence." Ouedraogo gestured toward the incomplete bridge. "Whether this was planned or coincidental, the effect is the same. We're exposed, and the enemy may be prepared to exploit that." Traoré appreciated the Major's willingness to push back. "Yes, men got soldiers killed. What if we split the difference?" he proposed. "We stay here tonight, establish a defensive perimeter, and use the time to gather better intelligence on all potential routes. By morning, we'll have a clearer picture of where the threats actually are, and we can make an informed decision about how to proceed." Captain Sawadogo frowned. "Sir, staying here makes us a static target. If they know our location, they already know we've stopped at the bridge. Moving in darkness through unfamiliar territory with potential ambushes could be worse than fortifying our position here." Traoré pointed to the surrounding terrain. "We have clear sightlines in multiple directions. The river at our back prevents flanking from that side, and we can use the construction equipment and materials as additional cover. Tactically, it's defensible for a limited time." The security team exchanged glances. They didn't like it. Protecting the President meant minimizing risk, not deliberately creating a situation where he might be attacked. But they also knew Ibrahim Traoré had led men in combat, had planned operations, had survived firefights in this very region. He wasn't a civilian politician playing soldier. He was a soldier who happened to be president. "Very well, sir," Major Ouedraogo said finally. "But I want full defensive positions established within 30 minutes. I'm calling in aerial reconnaissance from Ouagadougou." We'll have a drone overhead by nightfall. And I'm requesting immediate backup from the nearest garrison. They may not reach us until tomorrow morning, but I want them moving in our direction now." "Approved," Traoré said. "But Major, one more thing. The investigation into how this route information failed to reach us, I want Colonel Compaoré to handle that personally and quietly. If there's a security breach in the Presidential Service or the Ministry of Infrastructure, we need to know about it, without alerting whoever might be responsible." "You think we have an infiltrator?" Sawadogo asked, his hand unconsciously moving to his sidearm. "I think we have an incomplete bridge and inconsistent intelligence at a very convenient moment for our enemies," Traoré replied. "Gas, that could be incompetence, corruption, infiltration, or simple bad luck. But in my experience, when things happen that benefit your adversary, it's worth investigating whether that benefit was intentional." As the presidential security team began organizing defensive positions around the incomplete bridge, Traoré watched the construction workers gathering their tools. The project foreman, the same man who had first explained the delay, kept glancing nervously at the military preparations. That could simply be the normal anxiety of a civilian caught in a potentially dangerous situation, or it could be something else. In Burkina Faso, where militants had been known to infiltrate everything from army units to government offices, trust was a luxury that had cost many lives. The sun continued its descent, and with it came the inevitable cooling of the desert night. Traoré pulled his military jacket tighter and accepted a cup of strong coffee from one of his aides. There would be no sleep tonight. Not really, just vigilance, preparation, and the hope that when morning came, they would understand enough about the threat to navigate it safely. But even as his team established defensive perimeters and checked their weapons, a deeper concern nagged at Ibrahim Traoré's mind. What if the broken bridge wasn't the trap? What if it was simply the trigger that would force them to walk into one? Chapter. Night fell over the northern savannah like a heavy blanket, transforming the familiar landscape into a realm of shadows and uncertainty. The presidential motorcade formed a defensive circle around the incomplete bridge approach, their vehicles positioned to provide both cover and fields of fire. Powerful portable lights, powered by generators brought from the construction site, created a harsh perimeter of illumination that pushed back the darkness, but only so far. Beyond that ring of light, the African night stretched endlessly, concealing whatever might be waiting. Traoré sat on the hood of his armored vehicle, studying a tablet displaying real-time intelligence feeds. The promised drone had arrived an hour after sunset, its thermal imaging cameras sweeping the surrounding area in expanding circles. So far, nothing alarming. A few scattered heat signatures that could be wildlife or civilians, but no concentrations suggesting militant forces. That should have been reassuring, but years of combat experience had taught Ibrahim Traoré that the absence of visible enemies often meant they were simply better hidden. "Sir, encrypted message from Colonel Compaoré," Major Ouedraogo announced, approaching with his secure phone. "He's asking for a private conversation." Traoré took the phone and walked away from the main group, seeking relative privacy near the river's edge, where the rushing water would mask his words. "Colonel, what have you found?" Compaoré's voice was tense. "Mr. President, we have a problem. The bridge completion report that made it into your route briefing this morning was falsified. I've traced the document back to a mid-level official in the Infrastructure Ministry's Project Coordination Office, a man named Idrissa Sawadogo, no relation to your driver. He's been employed there for 6 years, no red flags in his background check, but—" The colonel paused. "He hasn't reported to work in 3 days, and his family claims they haven't seen him since Monday." "Disappeared?" Traoré asked, his mind racing through implications. "Or hiding, or—" Compaoré hesitated. "Mr. President, there's more. We've been reviewing communications intercepts from the past month, specifically looking for patterns that might indicate planning for an operation against a high-value target. We found several coded exchanges between individuals we've identified as JNIM facilitators. The translations are incomplete, but one phrase keeps appearing. The bridge will force the lion to walk through the valley." Traoré felt his blood run cold. In Burkinabe military parlance, the lion was sometimes used as a reference to him, a nickname that had emerged from his rise to power and his aggressive stance against the insurgency. Actually, when were these intercepts recorded? The first one was 3 weeks ago. The most recent was yesterday morning, 8 hours before your motorcade departed Ouagadougou. Compaoré's voice carried the weight of a man delivering news he wished he didn't have to share. Sir, we believe this was a planned operation. The bridge delay was manufactured to force you onto an alternative route where they could stage an ambush. The question is whether they've adapted their plan now that you've stopped at the bridge location, or whether stopping here was also part of their plan, Traoré added grimly. A static target is easier to locate and strike than a moving convoy, especially if they have someone feeding them information about our position. I've ordered a complete communications lockdown on your situation, Compaoré said quickly. Only essential personnel know your exact location, and I've personally vetted each of them. But Mr. President, I can have a helicopter extraction team to you within 90 minutes. We can pull you out, get you back to secure facilities, and abandon my security detail and these construction workers to whatever might be coming. Traoré shook his head even though Compaoré couldn't see it. No, we stay together. We defend this position, and if an attack comes, we deal with it. Colonel, I need you to focus your intelligence assets on the potential threat vectors. Where would they stage an attack from if they're planning one? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mr. President, you're the Commander-in-Chief. Your survival is paramount. If you're lost, if I'm lost, Mali and Niger will mourn, our enemies will celebrate, and Burkina Faso will find another leader, Traoré interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. But if I run from every threat, if I make decisions based on fear rather than strategy, then I'm already lost in the ways that matter. Now, Colonel, I need actionable intelligence, not evacuation plans. Where would they attack from? Another pause. Then Compaoré's voice returned with the clipped professionalism of a military officer accepting his orders. Based on the terrain analysis and recent militant activity patterns, the most likely approach would be from the northwest quadrant, approximately 3 to 5 kilometers from your position. There's a cluster of rocky outcroppings that provide natural cover, and we've documented JNIM presence in that sector within the past 2 weeks. If they're planning a mortar or rocket attack, that's where they'd stage it. For a ground assault, they'd likely use the riverbed as an approach route during darkness, hitting you from multiple angles once they're close. Thank you, Colonel. Keep me updated on any developments and continue the investigation into our security breach. If someone inside government structures is working with the militants, we need to know who and how deep it goes. Traoré ended the call and returned to where his security team had gathered. Major Ouedraogo looked up expectantly. Sir, we have confirmation that this was a planned operation, Traoré said without preamble. The bridge delay was manufactured, and there's intelligence suggesting militants have been planning an attack against my convoy. Colonel Compaoré believes the most likely threat vector is from the northwest, possibly mortar or rocket fire from the rocky terrain about 3 to 5 kilometers out. The Major's expression hardened. Then we need to move, sir. Now, before they can what, Major? Traoré challenged. Before they adapt their plans to wherever we run to. We don't know their full strategy. They may have teams positioned along every potential route, waiting for us to move into their kill zones. At least here, we've had time to prepare defenses. We have clear sight lines, we have cover, and we have a defensible position. If they want to attack us here, they'll pay a heavy price. Lieutenant Zungrana stepped forward. Sir, with your permission, I could take a small reconnaissance team and approach those northwestern outcroppings. If there are militants staging there, we could identify their positions, perhaps even disrupt their attack before it begins. Traoré considered this. A proactive reconnaissance made tactical sense, but it would also divide his already small force and potentially put good soldiers into a trap. How many men would you need? 4, including myself. All Cobra unit veterans, trained in night operations and familiar with JNIM tactics. Major, your assessment? Traoré asked. Ouedraogo chewed his lip, clearly torn. It's risky. If the lieutenant's team runs into a larger force, we might not be able to support them in time. But if there is a mortar team out there preparing to hit us, early warning could be the difference between casualties and survival, and Cobra unit trained for exactly this kind of mission. Do it, Traoré decided. But, Lieutenant, you are not, I repeat, not to engage unless absolutely necessary. This is reconnaissance only. Identify positions, estimate force strength, and report back. If you make contact, Break off and return immediately. We need information, not heroes. Understood. Understood, sir, Zungrana said, already moving to select his team. Within 15 minutes, 4 shadows slipped out of the perimeter's illuminated zone, moving with the practiced stealth of special operations soldiers. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving the remaining security force to maintain vigilance and wait, the hardest part of any military operation. Waiting, not knowing, preparing for an attack that might never come or might arrive from an unexpected direction. Traoré climbed onto the roof of his armored vehicle, using his night vision binoculars to scan the horizon. The stars were magnificent out here, away from city lights, the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. It was beautiful and serene, completely at odds with the tension that gripped every person in the defensive perimeter. This was Burkina Faso, a land of stunning natural beauty and devastating violence, where a wrong turn or a delayed bridge could mean the difference between life and death. And somewhere in that darkness, enemies who wanted him dead were making their own preparations. The question was whether Ibrahim Traoré and his small force would be ready when they came. Chapter 4. The first hour passed with agonizing slowness. Traoré maintained his position atop the armored vehicle, methodically scanning different sectors with his night vision equipment while his mind worked through countless scenarios. Below him, the remaining security force had settled into a disciplined watch rotation, some manning the perimeter, others catching brief rest while they could, all maintaining the quiet alertness that separated professional soldiers from amateurs. At 11:47 p.m., the radio crackled to life. Lieutenant Zungrana's voice, barely above a whisper, came through. Eagle 1, this is Scout Team. We've reached the primary suspected position. Multiple heat signatures detected. I count at least 15, possibly more. They have equipment that matches the profile for 82mm mortars, and they're establishing firing positions. They're professionals, sir. This isn't a militia. This is a coordinated unit. Major Ouedraogo grabbed the radio. His Scout Team, can you identify any command elements or additional forces? Negative on command identification, but I'm seeing movement that suggests more personnel to our north and east. This isn't just one mortar team. It looks like a multi-pronged operation. They're positioning for simultaneous strikes. A pause. Then Zungrana's voice returned with increased urgency. Sir, based on their preparation timeline, I estimate they're planning to attack within the next 2 to 3 hours, probably timed for just before dawn, when visibility is worst and fatigue highest. Traoré took the radio from Ouedraogo. Lieutenant, stay in position but maintain concealment. If they've gone to this much trouble to set up this operation, they'll have security patrols. Don't let them detect you. Understood, sir. Scout Team will maintain observation and Zungrana's transmission cut off abruptly. The silence that followed stretched for 30 seconds. 45. A minute. Major Ouedraogo was already coordinating with the other security personnel, preparing for the possibility that the reconnaissance team had been compromised. Then finally, Zungrana's voice returned, even quieter than before. Eagle 1, and we have a patrol passing within 20 meters of our position, going silent. We'll report when clear. The radio went dead. Traoré climbed down from the vehicle, his mind made up. Major, we can't wait for them to attack at their chosen time and place. We need to disrupt their operation now. Sir, we have fewer than 20 personnel if you include the construction workers, and most of them aren't combatants. The militants have superior numbers, prepared positions, and the element of surprise, or at least they think they do. If we launch an assault— I'm not suggesting an assault, Traoré interrupted, but we can't just sit here waiting to absorb mortar fire. What assets do we have available from Ouagadougou? The drone overhead, but it's reconnaissance only, no weapons capability. The nearest ground forces are still at least 90 minutes away, even if they were moving at maximum speed, which they aren't because we don't want to alert the militants to a military buildup. Ouedraogo pulled up a map on his tablet. We do have artillery batteries at the Kaya garrison, approximately 70 kilometers southeast. If we can get precise coordinates from Lieutenant Zungrana's team, we could call in fire support. But artillery in a humanitarian crisis zone with potential civilian presence is politically and ethically complicated, Traoré finished, and the sound of artillery would alert every militant within 50 kilometers that something significant is happening. They'd either scatter or accelerate their timetable. Captain Ouedraogo approached with a different suggestion. Sir, what about a false retreat? We could stage a withdrawal, make it look like we're abandoning the bridge position and moving south toward safer territory. If the militants think we're running, they might rush their attack, make mistakes, or come out of their prepared positions. It was creative thinking, but Traoré saw the flaws immediately. If we actually start moving vehicles, we commit to a direction. If they've positioned forces along multiple potential escape routes, which a professional operation would, we might be driving straight into a worse ambush. And if they're smart enough to set all this up, they're smart enough to recognize a feint. The radio crackled again. Eagle 1, scout team leader. Patrol has passed. We're clear for now, but I've got new information. The mortar team is receiving instructions via radio from someone speaking in local Moray dialect with a Ouagadougou accent. This isn't just JNIM, they have local support, possibly someone with knowledge of government procedures and security protocols. And sir, Zoongrana's voice dropped even lower. I heard them reference your call sign. They know you're here. This operation is specifically targeting you, not just a government convoy. Traoré's security team immediately tensed. One of the construction workers, an older man who had been sitting quietly near one of the excavators, suddenly stood up and began walking toward the darkness beyond the perimeter. 2 guards intercepted him before he'd gone 5 steps. "Where do you think you're going?" one guard demanded. I need to relieve myself," the worker stammered, but his eyes were wide with fear or something else. "Do it within the perimeter," the guard ordered, not lowering his weapon. Traoré watched this exchange with growing suspicion. "Major, I want all the construction workers questioned, separately. I want to know their names, their villages, who hired them for this project, and whether any of them have been in contact with anyone unusual in the past month." "You think one of them is feeding intelligence to the militants?" Ouagadougou asked. "I think we have a security breach somewhere, and the workers are the only unvetted civilians who've been in close proximity to our position for the past several hours. It's worth investigating." Traoré gestured toward the worker who'd tried to leave. "Start with that one, and check all their mobile phones, if someone's been sending messages about our situation." While the security team began their interrogation, Traoré returned to studying the tactical situation. 15 militants with mortars were a serious threat, but they were also relatively stationary while they prepared their attack. That was their weakness. If he could get precise coordinates to an artillery battery, or better yet, to the drone overhead, but reconnaissance drones didn't carry weapons. Or did they? "Major, contact the drone operator. I want to know the exact model of UAV we have overhead, and whether it has any capabilities beyond passive observation." Ouagadougou made the call, listened, then reported, "It's a Chinese-made CH-3A, acquired last year from our technology partnership agreements. The operator says it's technically capable of carrying munitions, but this particular unit departed Ouagadougou without weapons because it was tasked as a reconnaissance mission, not combat." "Of course it wasn't armed," Traoré muttered. In a perfect world with unlimited resources, he'd have a fully equipped military drone overhead ready to strike. But this was Burkina Faso, a nation fighting an insurgency on a limited budget, where every bullet and every gallon of fuel had to be carefully allocated. They worked with what they had, not what they wished they had. The radio came alive again with Lieutenant Zoongrana's voice, now carrying unmistakable urgency. "Eagle 1, we have a problem. I've spotted what appears to be a mobile phone with night vision capability pointed directly at the bridge position. Someone's providing real-time intelligence to the mortar team. They're adjusting their targeting based on live observation. Sir, I think they're almost ready to begin their attack. We're out of time." Traoré looked at the faces of his security team, saw the same grim determination he'd witnessed countless times during combat operations. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. But Ibrahim Traoré hadn't survived years of fighting jihadists in northern Burkina Faso by giving up when situations looked impossible. He'd survived by being unpredictable, by making bold decisions when caution seemed safer, and by trusting the training and courage of the soldiers around him. "Major," he said quietly, "I have an idea. It's risky, and a lot of people aren't going to like it, but I think it's our best chance of surviving the next few hours." As he began outlining his plan, several of his security personnel looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Perhaps he had, But in war, the difference between brilliance and insanity was often nothing more than whether your plan actually worked. Chapter 5. Traoré's plan was audacious to the point of recklessness, but as he explained the details, even the skeptical members of his security team began to see the logic. If the militants were expecting to attack a static defensive position just before dawn, they would be prepared for return fire, evacuation attempts, or calls for backup. What they wouldn't be prepared for was a counterattack launched from an unexpected direction while they were still in their preparatory phase. "Sir, you're suggesting we take the fight to them?" Major Ouedraogo said, his voice reflecting both concern and grudging admiration. "With our limited numbers against a force at least 3 times our size." "Not exactly," Traoré corrected. "I'm suggesting we make them think we're taking the fight to them, while actually repositioning our defensive assets to survive their attack and catch them in their own trap." He pointed to the map on the tablet. "Lieutenant Zungrana's team has given us precise locations of the mortar positions. We know they're expecting to shell this bridge site. What if we give them a target that appears to be us but isn't?" Captain Ouedraogo's eyes widened with understanding. "The construction equipment. We use the lights and generators to make it look like we're still here, but we actually pull back to secondary positions where we can observe their attack and counterstrike once they've revealed themselves." "Exactly," Traoré confirmed. "The construction vehicles are large enough to create convincing shadows. We stage some of them to look like our military vehicles from a distance, especially from the elevated position where their forward observer is watching. Once they begin their mortar attack, they'll be completely focused on this killing zone. That's when Lieutenant Zungrana's team marks their actual positions with infrared designators that our drone can see, and we call in artillery from Kaya Garrison." "But sir," one of the younger guards interjected, "if we call in artillery, the militants will hear it coming and scatter before impact. Artillery with traditional high-explosive rounds doesn't," Traoré agreed. "But Major, contact Colonel Compaoré. I want to know if Kaya Garrison has access to any of the precision-guided munitions we acquired from Turkey last year, the 120mm GPS-guided mortar shells." Ouedraogo's face registered surprise, then calculation. "Those rounds are incredibly expensive, hey, sir. We've been saving them for a situation exactly like this," Traoré interrupted. "Faris, what's the point of having advanced weaponry if we're too afraid to use it when it actually matters? If we have those precision rounds, we can put them exactly on target with minimal collateral damage and no warning to the enemy. They'll never know what hit them." While the Major made urgent calls to confirm the availability of the Turkish precision rounds, Traoré gathered his security team for detailed coordination. The success of this plan depended on perfect timing and absolute discipline. They would need to maintain the illusion of their presence at the bridge site while actually repositioning to concealed locations where they could both survive the expected attack and launch their counterstrike. "Captain Ouedraogo, you'll command the eastern defensive position with 6 personnel. Major Ouedraogo, you take the western position with 6 more. I'll remain mobile with 4 guards, ready to respond wherever needed." Traoré looked at each face, seeing the mixture of fear and determination he'd witnessed so many times before. "The construction workers will be evacuated to a secure location 2 kilometers south under guard of 2 personnel. They'll stay there until this is resolved." "Sir, what about you?" Ouedraogo challenged. "You should be with the evacuated civilians, not in the middle of a combat zone." Traoré fixed the Major with a steady gaze. "Major, I've led men in combat in this region for years before becoming president. I'm not going to hide in a ditch while soldiers risk their lives on my behalf. That's not who I am. And more importantly, it's not what Burkina Faso needs right now. This nation needs a leader who stands with his people, not one who asks them to die for causes he's unwilling to face himself." There was a long moment of silence. Then Ouedraogo nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, but you're taking the best body armor we have, and you're staying in communication at all times. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." "Agreed." "Agreed," Traoré said, though they both knew that in combat, there was no such thing as unnecessary risks. There were only the risks required to survive and win. The next 90 minutes were a flurry of carefully orchestrated activity. Under the cover of darkness, the security team began repositioning vehicles and equipment. Construction machinery was strategically placed to cast shadows resembling military vehicles in the harsh perimeter lighting. Generators were set to automatic timers that would keep the lights burning and create the impression of ongoing activity. Personal equipment, helmets, packs, even rifles propped against sandbags, was positioned to suggest sentries at their posts. Meanwhile, the actual defensive positions were being established 300 meters away in carefully selected locations that provided both cover and clear sightlines back toward the bridge site. If the militants attacked as expected, they would pour mortar fire into what they thought was a presidential convoy, only to find they'd been shelling empty vehicles and construction equipment while the actual defenders prepared to return fire. At 2:15 a.m., Major Ouedraogo received confirmation from Colonel Compaoré. Kaya Garrison had 8 Turkish-made precision-guided 120mm mortar rounds in inventory. Each round cost more than 3 times what traditional shells cost, but they could be placed within a 3-meter radius of target coordinates and required only 1 to 3 rounds to neutralize a position that might take dozens of traditional shells. More importantly, they could be fired from 70 kilometers away and arrive on target within 3 minutes, guided by GPS to their destination with minimal warning to the enemy. 8 rounds, Traoré repeated thoughtfully. Lieutenant Zungrana identified at least 3 distinct mortar positions. If we use 2 rounds per position, that gives us 2 rounds for additional targets or targets of opportunity. It'll have to be enough. The radio crackled. Eagle 1, scout team leader, the militants are beginning final preparations. They've received what appears to be a launch order. I estimate 30 minutes until they begin their attack. Roger that, scout team, stand by for marking instructions. Traoré switched to the command frequency. All positions, this is Eagle 1. Report readiness. 1 by 1. The defensive positions checked in. Eastern position, ready. Western position, ready. Civilians evacuated. Confirmed. Kaya Garrison fire mission, plotted and ready to execute on command. Drone overhead. Repositioned to observe both the bridge site and the militant positions. Its thermal imaging cameras providing real-time intelligence to the tactical command center in Ouagadougou. Traoré settled into his position behind a large boulder that provided excellent cover, while allowing him to observe the bridge site 300 meters away. Through his night vision equipment, he could see the elaborate deception they'd created. It looked convincing even to him, and he knew it was fake. From a distance, with mortar teams focused on their targeting calculations, it would be entirely believable. "Sir," one of his guards whispered, "what if they realize it's a trap before they attack? Then they'll have wasted weeks of planning, exposed their coordination capabilities, and learned that Ibrahim Traoré is harder to kill than they thought." Traoré replied quietly. "But they won't realize it. They can't afford to. They've committed too many resources to this operation, and their commanders will be watching. Pride and pressure will make them attack even if they start having doubts." At 2:43 a.m., the night erupted with sound and fury. The first mortar round screamed through the darkness and impacted directly on one of the construction vehicles positioned to look like the presidential armored car. The explosion lit up the night, sending shrapnel and vehicle parts flying in all directions. Then came the second round and the third, and suddenly the entire bridge site was being pummeled by a systematic, professional mortar barrage that demonstrated both skill and determination. "They're good," Captain Ouedraogo observed over the radio, watching the attack through his scope. "That's textbook indirect fire coordination, if we'd actually been there. But we're not," Traoré said firmly. "Scout team, begin marking targets now. Fire control, this is Eagle 1. Execute fire mission on my command." Chapter 6. The mortar barrage continued with devastating precision, each round methodically destroying what the militants believed to be the presidential convoy. Through their night vision equipment, Traoré and his team watched as construction vehicles were reduced to twisted metal, as carefully positioned equipment was obliterated, as the elaborate deception that had taken hours to create was destroyed in minutes. But there were no casualties, no screams of wounded soldiers, no frantic radio calls for medical evacuation, just the satisfaction of knowing their enemy was expending ammunition and revealing their positions against an empty target. "Scout team has marked all 3 primary mortar positions," Lieutenant Zungrana reported, his voice steady despite the danger of his position just a few hundred meters from the attacking militants. "Infrared designators are active. Drone should have clear acquisition." Colonel Compaoré's voice came through on the command channel from Ouagadougou. Drone confirms 3 marked positions. Fire mission data is being transmitted to Kaya Garrison. Sir, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we fire those precision rounds, there's no taking it back, and the expense. Execute the fire mission, Colonel, Traoré commanded. Those militants are trying to kill the president of Burkina Faso, and anyone with him. The cost of those munitions is irrelevant compared to sending a message that such attacks will not be tolerated and will be answered with overwhelming force. Fire mission executing, Compaoré confirmed. Rounds away. Time to impact. 2 minutes, 45 seconds. Those 165 seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The militant mortar attack began to taper off. They'd fired approximately 30 rounds, a significant expenditure that suggested this was indeed a well-supplied and well-planned operation. Through his binoculars, Traoré could see movement in the distant mortar positions as the crews prepared to either displace to new locations or advance to confirm their kills. That was the moment of maximum vulnerability, when they would be most exposed and least prepared for a counterstrike. All positions, be ready, Traoré said quietly. When those Turkish rounds hit, there will be confusion and chaos. Some militants may flee in our direction. Free fire on any armed personnel approaching our positions. Watch your sectors, don't bunch up, and remember your training. The first precision-guided round arrived with a sound like thunder compressed into a single instant. Where the northernmost mortar position had been, there was suddenly a massive explosion that lit up the pre-dawn darkness like a miniature sun. Before the sound had even finished echoing across the savannah, the second round struck the central position with equal accuracy. The third and fourth rounds hit the southern position in rapid succession, creating a devastating concentration of explosive force that simply erased the militant firing positions from existence. The fifth through eighth rounds, held in reserve for targets of opportunity E, weren't needed. The precision of the initial strikes had done more than destroy mortar crews. They'd shattered the enemy's will to fight. Through the drone's thermal imaging feed, transmitted to Traoré's tactical display, he could see dozens of heat signatures scattering in all directions as surviving militants abandoned their positions and fled into the darkness. What had been an organized military operation 60 seconds ago was now a rout. "Scout team, what's your status?" Traoré called. "We're clear, sir," Zungrana reported, breathing hard. "The blast knocked us around a bit, but we're operational. I count multiple casualties in the primary positions, likely no survivors in the immediate impact zones. Additional militants fleeing north and west. Should we pursue? Negative. Break contact and return to Eagle One's position. Your job was reconnaissance and targeting. You've accomplished that superbly. Let them run. They'll carry the story of what happened here to every militant camp between here and Mali." Traoré allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Sometimes the survivors you let escape are worth more than the enemies you kill. They'll tell others what happens when you attack the president of Burkina Faso." As Lieutenant Zungrana's team began their return journey, Major Ouedraogo coordinated with Colonel Compaoré on the next steps. Military units from Kaya Garrison were being mobilized to secure the area, investigate the destroyed militant positions, and establish a more permanent security presence in this sector. The reinforcements that had been too far away to help during the attack would now serve to consolidate the victory and prevent any attempt by the militants to regroup. By 4:30 a.m., with the first hints of dawn beginning to lighten the eastern sky, the immediate danger had passed. Traoré stood near the incomplete bridge that had started this entire chain of events, looking at the destroyed decoy vehicles that had absorbed the mortar attack meant for him. The plan had worked, but it had been a near thing. If the reconnaissance team had been detected, if the precision rounds hadn't been available, if the militants had been more cautious or less committed to their attack, any of those factors could have changed the outcome dramatically. "Sir, Colonel Compaoré is requesting a secure video conference," Major Ouedraogo announced. Traoré accepted the tablet and saw the intelligence chief's exhausted face. "Mr. President Due, I have preliminary results from our investigation into the security breach. The missing infrastructure ministry official, Idrissa Sawadogo. We've tracked his movements leading up to his disappearance. He was deeply in debt, gambling, primarily, and we have evidence of several cash deposits into his wife's account over the past 2 months, totaling approximately 3 million CFA francs. The timing suggests he was being paid to provide information and manipulate your route planning. Do we know who paid him? Traoré asked. We're still tracing the money, but the amounts and timing match patterns we've seen in other JNIM financing operations. Sir, this wasn't just one man. This was a systematic intelligence operation designed to create this opportunity. They've been planning this for at least 2 months, maybe longer. Traoré absorbed this information. What about Sawadogo himself? Have you found him? Compaoré's expression darkened. We found a body matching his description in a drainage ditch 40 kilometers north of Ouagadougou. Shot once in the back of the head. Professional execution. My assessment is that once he'd fulfilled his purpose and provided the false bridge completion report, he became a liability. The militants eliminated him to prevent him from being interrogated if we discovered the breach. So they tie up loose ends, Traoré said quietly. That level of operational security suggests professional planning, not just opportunistic violence. Colonel, I want a comprehensive security review of all personnel with access to presidential movements. If they could compromise one official, they may have others in place. And I want that construction foreman from the bridge site questioned extensively. He seemed far too nervous. Already being done, sir. But, Mr. President, there's something else you should see. Compaoré's face filled the screen, his expression grave. We've intercepted communications from JNIM leadership. They're claiming responsibility for the attack and declaring that their operation was only partially disrupted. They're claiming they have additional assets in position for a follow-up attack when you resume your journey to Djibo. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you more content like this. Chapter 7. The dawn broke over the northern savannah, revealing the full extent of the night's violence. Smoke still rose from the destroyed militant positions, visible as dark columns against the brightening sky. The destroyed decoy vehicles at the bridge site smoldered, their twisted metal, a testament to how devastating the mortar attack would have been if Traoré and his team had actually been there. But they weren't. And that fact had undoubtedly reached JNM leadership by now. Traoré sat on a folding chair near his undamaged armored vehicle, accepting a cup of strong coffee from one of his guards. Around him, the security team was conducting post-action procedures, checking equipment, documenting the incident, and preparing for the arrival of the reinforcement column from Kaya Garrison. Lieutenant Zungrana and his reconnaissance team had returned safely, exhausted but unharmed, their precision targeting having made the difference between a defensive survival and a decisive victory. Sir, reinforcements will be here within the hour, Major Ouedraogo reported. Once they arrive, we can either return to Ouagadougou or continue to Djibo with a significantly larger security presence. However, the Major hesitated. However, Colonel Compaoré's intelligence suggests this isn't over, Traoré finished. The militants are claiming they have additional assets positioned for a follow-up attack, which raises several questions. Captain Sawadogo joined them, his uniform still dusty from the night's operations. With respect, sir, it could be a bluff. They just suffered a devastating defeat. 3 mortar crews wiped out in a matter of seconds by weapons they didn't even know we had. They might be trying to keep us off balance with psychological warfare, making us believe every kilometer between here and Djibo is a potential ambush zone. Or, Lieutenant Zungrana interjected, they're telling the truth, and they really do have additional teams positioned. JNIM has demonstrated sophisticated planning capabilities. It's entirely plausible they'd have contingency plans if the primary attack failed. Traoré considered this while sipping his coffee. The question isn't whether they might have additional forces. In their position, I certainly would. The question is whether we let the possibility of additional attacks dictate our decisions. If we turn back to Ouagadougou, what message does that send? That the president can be forced to abandon his plans by threats, Major Ouedraogo suggested. Exactly. And not just to militants, but to our own military, to government officials, to the civilians of Djibo who are expecting us, and to our regional partners who are watching to see whether Burkina Faso's leadership has the resolve to govern effectively. Traoré stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of tension. We continue to Djibo as planned, but we don't make it easy for them. Sir? Ouedraogo's face registered surprise. If they have additional assets positioned, those assets are expecting us to follow the most direct route once the bridge situation is resolved, either by completing the bridge or by taking one of the standard detour routes. What if we do neither? Traoré pulled up a map on his tablet. We have reinforcements arriving with heavy equipment. What if we create our own crossing point? Use engineering vehicles to grade a ford across the river at a location they're not expecting. Captain Sawadogo studied the map. There's a section about 6 kilometers downstream where the river widens and becomes much shallower during dry season. With the right equipment, we could probably make it passable for military vehicles within a few hours. But, sir, that still puts us on the northern bank of the Nakambe, and any remaining militant forces would adapt once they saw what we were doing. Would they? Traoré challenged. Adaptation takes time, especially when you're coordinating multiple teams across a large area with potentially compromised communications. By the time they realize where we're crossing and reposition their forces, we could be well past whatever ambush zones they've established. Colonel Compaoré's voice came through on the command channel. Mr. President, I've been listening to your conversation. It's a bold plan, but I should inform you that we've identified at least 4 potential ambush sites between your current location and Djibo along the standard routes. 2 of them have recent thermal imaging signatures consistent with concealed personnel and equipment. If you were to use the standard detour through Bulsa, you'd almost certainly encounter hostile forces. And if we create our own crossing point and approach Djibo from an unexpected angle. The western approach from the river ford you're suggesting is largely open terrain with few natural ambush positions. It would be difficult for militants to establish effective positions there without being visible from considerable distance. From a tactical standpoint, it's actually your best option, assuming the river crossing is feasible. Within minutes of the reinforcement column's arrival, Traoré's plan was put into motion. Military engineers assessed the proposed crossing point and confirmed it was viable. The river was shallow enough that with some grading of the approaches and placement of temporary roadway materials, even heavily armored vehicles could ford it safely. The work would take approximately 4 hours, but it would allow them to bypass every ambush site the militants had likely prepared. While the engineering work proceeded, Traoré finally had time to address another matter that had been nagging at him. Major, what about the construction foreman from the bridge site, the one who seemed so nervous when we arrived? He's being held with the evacuated civilian workers under guard. Do you want him brought here for questioning? Yes, but not formally. I want to talk to him, soldier to civilian. Sometimes people are more forthcoming when they're not being officially interrogated. Traoré grabbed his jacket and walked toward where the construction workers were being held, a secure area about half a kilometer from the main position, watched over by 2 guards but relatively comfortable given the circumstances. The foreman, a weathered man in his 50s named Daouda Ouedraogo, looked up with genuine fear when Traoré approached. Mr. President, I swear I had nothing to do with— Relax, Mr. Ouedraogo, Traoré said, sitting on the ground beside him, a gesture of equality that immediately changed the dynamics. I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I'm here because you know something and I need to understand what it is. The foreman's eyes widened. Sir, I don't know anything about the attack or who— I know you don't, Traoré interrupted gently, but you were nervous when we arrived. You've been nervous ever since. Why? There was a long pause. Finally, Daouda spoke quietly. 3 days ago, a man came to our worksite. He said he was from the Infrastructure Ministry, checking on our progress. But, Mr. President, I've worked construction for 30 years. I know the difference between a bureaucrat and a soldier. This man moved like a soldier, talked like a soldier, and he asked very specific questions about when the bridge would be complete, what the actual status was, who we'd reported to. Did he identify himself? Traoré asked. He had credentials that looked official, called himself Inspector Traoré. No relation to you, obviously. But after he left, one of my workers told me he'd seen the same man in a market in Kaya 2 weeks earlier, buying supplies and speaking with people who are known to have militant sympathies. I didn't think much of it at the time. It's not my place to question who the ministry sends. But then when you arrived and I saw all the military preparations, Daouda trailed off. You realize the bridge delay might have been more than just a construction problem? Traoré finished. Mr. Ouedraogo, did this inspector ask anything about when government officials might be traveling this route? He did, sir. I told him I didn't know about any official visits, which was true at the time, but he seemed very interested in the bridge completion date and what would happen if someone needed to cross before it was finished. Daouda looked directly at Traoré. Mr. President, I'm just a foreman trying to feed my family. I don't want any trouble with militants or government or anyone, but I need you to know I didn't help him. I didn't give him any information that would put anyone in danger. Traoré believed him. The man's fear was genuine, but so was his honesty. Mr. Ouedraogo, you've done nothing wrong, but I need you to work with my intelligence services to provide a detailed description of this inspector and everything he asked about. Can you do that? Yes, sir, absolutely. Good. And Mr. Ouedraogo, thank you for your honesty. It's people like you, honest people doing honest work, who will help Burkina Faso overcome these challenges. Traoré stood and returned to the main position, where Major Ouedraogo was coordinating the river crossing preparations. The foreman confirmed they had surveillance from someone posing as a ministry inspector, Traoré reported. This operation was even more thoroughly planned than we thought. They not only had someone on the inside manipulating reports, they had field operatives conducting physical reconnaissance. Colonel Compaoré, He was interrupted by an urgent transmission from one of the security perimeter guards. Eagle 1, we have movement to the south. Vehicle approaching at high speed, approximately 2 kilometers out. Single civilian truck. Driver appears to be alone. He's waving something white. Looks like he's trying to signal surrender or parley. Every weapon in the perimeter immediately oriented toward the approaching threat. Through binoculars, Traoré could see an old pickup truck bouncing across the rough terrain, a white cloth tied to its antenna. The driver was indeed alone, both hands visible on the steering wheel. As the truck came within 500 meters, it slowed and stopped. The driver got out slowly, hands raised, and shouted in Moor, "Don't shoot! I have information for the president. Please, don't shoot!" Could be a trap, Ouedraogo said immediately. Vehicle bomb, or a distraction while other forces, or it could be someone with genuinely important information, Traoré countered. Send a team to search him and the vehicle thoroughly. If he's clean, bring him here. I want to hear what's so important that he's risking his life to deliver it. Chapter 8. The man who arrived in the white pickup truck was named Bourema Diallo, a 63-year-old livestock trader from the village of Corsimoro. He stood before Traoré nervous but determined, his weathered hands clasped together as he tried to steady himself. The security team had thoroughly searched both him and his vehicle. No weapons, no explosives, nothing but an old man who claimed to have urgent information. "Mr. President," Bourema began in heavily accented French, "I am not a soldier or a politician. I am just a man trying to provide for my grandchildren. But I heard what happened here last night, the explosions, the fighting, and I knew I had to come and warn you before you continue north." "Warn me about what?" Traoré asked, gesturing for the man to sit. 2 days ago, men came to my village. They were not from Corsimoro. They were outsiders, maybe 20 or 30 of them. They had weapons and vehicles, and they told the village elder they would be staying for a few days. They said they were conducting operations against government forces, and that if anyone warned the authorities, they would burn the village and kill everyone. Bourema's hands shook slightly. "Mr. President, I have 10 grandchildren in that village, but I also have a brother who died fighting the militants 5 years ago. I cannot stand by and let more people die if I can prevent it." Major Ouedraogo stepped forward. "Where exactly did these militants position themselves? What are their numbers and capabilities?" "They are in the old colonial fort on the hill overlooking the Djibo Road, about 40 kilometers from here. The fort has been abandoned for many years, but it provides good views of the main road. They have positioned vehicles and weapons there. I saw mortars, heavy machine guns, maybe other things I don't recognize. They are waiting for a government convoy. They didn't say which one, but after hearing about the attack last night, I realized they must be waiting for you, Mr. President." Traoré pulled up a map and had Bourema identify the exact location. The old colonial fort was indeed positioned to provide excellent fields of fire on the standard route to Djibo. If they had taken the direct road, or even the Bulsa detour route, they would have passed within range of a well-prepared ambush position. But the western approach they were now planning would bypass that fort entirely, keeping them out of visual range and effective weapons range. "Mr. Bourema," Traoré said carefully, "you've taken an enormous risk coming here. If the militants learn you've warned us, then they will kill me, and probably my family as well," the old man said simply. "Mr. President, I am old. My life is nearly complete, but my grandchildren deserve to grow up in a Burkina Faso where they don't have to live in fear, where schools stay open, where teachers aren't murdered for teaching children to read. If warning you can help achieve that, then my life has meaning beyond just buying and selling goats. The profound courage of this statement hung in the air. Here was a civilian with no military training, no protection, no guarantee of safety, risking everything because it was the right thing to do. Traoré felt a surge of emotion. This was the Burkina Faso he was fighting for, the nation of ordinary people with extraordinary courage who simply wanted to live in peace and raise their families without fear. Major Ouedraogo, I want Mr. Diallo placed under immediate military protection. His entire family from Coincidental will be evacuated to secure facilities in Ouagadougou until this situation is resolved. No exceptions, no delays. Traoré turned back to Bourema. You and your family will be safe, I promise you. And when this is over, when we've dealt with these militants, Burkina Faso will remember your courage. Colonel Compaoré's voice came through on the command channel. Mr. President, this intelligence from Mr. Diallo confirms what we've been seeing in our own surveillance. The colonial fort at Coincidental has shown increased activity over the past 48 hours. We were tracking it as a possible secondary target, but with this confirmation, we can plan accordingly. I recommend airstrikes on the fort position before you continue your journey. Negative, Traoré said immediately. Then, if we strike the fort, we alert every militant within 100 kilometers that we know about their positions and capabilities. Our advantage right now is that they think we're either dead from last night's attack or we're cautiously planning which standard route to take. If we suddenly start bombing their prepared positions, they'll realize we have better intelligence than they thought, and they'll adapt. But, sir, Major Ouedraogo protested, if we leave them in position, they're not in position for the route we're taking, Traoré pointed out. The Western Ford crossing puts us nowhere near the Coincidental fort. They'll be waiting for a convoy that never comes down their road. By the time they realize we've taken a completely different route, we'll already be in Djibo. Let them waste their time and resources waiting for an attack that never materializes from a direction they never anticipated. Captain Ouedraogo nodded slowly. It's sound strategy, sir, but it also means we need to maintain absolute communication security. If they get any indication of our actual route, they could still reposition. Agreed, Colonel Compaoré. I want complete radio silence on the actual crossing operation, except for encrypted command channels. Any communications about our movements should indicate we're still evaluating routes and options. Feed them disinformation if possible. Make them think we're being overly cautious and taking the long southern detour through Tenkodogo. That route would take 2 days and keep us well away from all their prepared positions. Deception operations are always risky, Mr. President, Compaoré warned. If they realize we're feeding false information, then they'll be confused and uncertain, which is almost as good as being completely unaware. Confusion creates hesitation. Hesitation creates delays. Delays create opportunities for us. Traoré checked his watch. How long until the river ford is ready? Engineering team estimates 2 more hours, Ouedraogo reported. Then we wait. Use the time to rest and resupply. Have meals prepared. Let the troops rotate through rest periods. Check all vehicles and weapons. When we cross that river and start the final approach to Djibo, I want everyone sharp and ready. As the morning sun climbed higher, transforming the cool dawn into the blazing heat of midday, Traoré found a quiet moment to stand alone near the riverbank. The Nakambe flowed gently here, its waters clear enough to see the sandy bottom. In the dry season, it was almost laughably easy to ford. During the rains, it would be a raging torrent that could sweep away vehicles and people alike. So much in Burkina Faso was about timing, about understanding the rhythms of land and weather and human conflict. He thought about the events of the past 24 hours, an incomplete bridge that forced a delay that exposed an elaborate ambush plan. An ambush that was defeated by preparation, intelligence, and the courage of soldiers willing to face danger. And now, an old livestock trader who risked everything to deliver a warning that might save lives. Each decision point could have gone differently. Each moment could have ended in disaster. But they hadn't. And now he was hours away from completing his journey to Djibo, proving to both supporters and enemies that the president of Burkina Faso could not be intimidated into hiding. Sir, Lieutenant Zungrana approached respectfully. The engineering team is ready to begin the final phase of the Ford construction. They estimate we can begin crossing vehicles within the hour. Good, Traoré said. And Lieutenant, I want to thank you and your reconnaissance team. Last night, your precise targeting under extremely dangerous conditions made the difference between defeat and victory. That was exceptional work. The young officer stood a bit straighter. Thank you, sir. It's what we trained for with Cobra Unit. You taught us that courage without precision is just wasted sacrifice, and precision without courage is meaningless. Last night, we had both. Traoré smiled at hearing his own tactical philosophy quoted back to him. Indeed we did, Lieutenant. Indeed we did. As the engineering vehicles made their final adjustments to the Ford crossing, Traoré gathered his security team for a final briefing before movement. Once we cross the river, we move fast. No stopping except for genuine emergencies. We maintain tactical dispersion between vehicles, but stay in visual contact. If we encounter any hostile forces, we return fire and push through. We don't stop to fight unless absolutely necessary. Our goal is to reach Djibo, not to hunt militants. Are there any questions? There were none. Every person in that perimeter understood the mission and accepted the risks. This was what they had signed up for when they joined the military, when they took oaths to defend Burkina Faso and its constitution, the fact that they were defending not just a nation, but a leader who stood among them, who took the same risks, who refused the safety of distance, that made the mission mean more. At 2:15 p.m., the first vehicle entered the Ford crossing. The water came up to the bottom of the doors, splashing and churning, but the graded approach held firm. One by one, the convoy crossed the Nakambe River at a location no militant had anticipated, moving toward Djibo through terrain that offered few opportunities for ambush. Ibrahim Traoré rode in the center vehicle, watching the landscape pass, knowing that somewhere out there, militant commanders were waiting for a convoy that would never come, while his actual force approached from an unexpected direction. In war, sometimes the greatest victories were the battles you avoided by being smarter than your enemy expected.